He thought he had just kicked out another poor woman. But by morning, his entire career would begin to unravel in ways he never saw coming. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change now. Back to Emily Carter. The glass doors of Blackstone Luxury Motors slid open with a soft hydraulic whisper as Emily stepped inside. The polished marble floors reflecting the morning light like a mirror of wealth and exclusivity. Her worn sneakers made almost no sound against the surface. Yet somehow, every head seemed to turn anyway. It wasn't loud. It wasn't obvious. But it was there, that subtle shift in the air when someone didn't belong. At 36, Emily carried herself with quiet composure, her light brown hair tied back in a simple low ponytail, her white blouse neatly pressed but unmistakably modest compared to the designer suits and tailored dresses around her. She paused just inside the entrance. Her eyes calmly scanning the showroom. Rows of luxury vehicles gleamed under carefully placed lights, each one priced well into six figures. Machines built not just for transportation, but for status, for power, for those who needed to be seen. A salesman standing near a silver Bentley glanced at her, then quickly looked away, his expression already deciding her place in the room. Not a buyer, just another dreamer wandering in to look. The faint murmur of conversation continued, but now threaded with something else, something sharper, curiosity mixed with quiet judgment. Emily took a few steps forward, her gaze settling on a deep midnight blue Rolls Royce positioned at the center platform, elevated slightly, as if it were royalty among machines. Her eyes lingered not with awe, but with recognition, the kind that came from familiarity rather than fantasy. Behind a polished desk near the back of the showroom, Richard Blake adjusted his cufflinks and watched her with practiced precision. At 45, he had built his reputation on reading people within seconds, and in his world those first impressions were everything. His tailored navy suit fit perfectly, his posture rigid with authority, his eyes sharp with calculation, and in less than 3 seconds he had already decided exactly who Emily Carter was, and more importantly, what she was not. Worth his time, he stepped forward slowly, each movement deliberate. As he crossed the showroom floor, the soft echo of his dress, shoes commanding more attention than her quiet entrance ever could. A few nearby customers subtly shifted their stance, giving him space. Recognizing the man in charge, Emily didn't move toward him, nor did she retreat. She simply stood there, her posture steady, her hands relaxed at her sides, as if she had all the time in the world. Richard stopped a few feet away, offering a smile that never quite reached his eyes. Good morning, he said, his tone smooth, but edged with something colder, something practiced. Are you looking for directions, or just browsing? The question hung in the air longer than it should have, not because of the words, but because of what they implied around them. Conversation slowed, just slightly, ears tuned in, without appearing obvious. Emily met his gaze calmly, her eyes steady, her voice soft but clear. I'm interested in that one, she said, gesturing toward the Rolls Royce. The room didn't erupt, it didn't gasp, but something shifted, a subtle tightening of attention, a quiet anticipation, as if everyone sensed the beginning of something they couldn't quite name. Yet Richard followed her gesture, then looked back at her, and for a brief moment his smile sharpened almost imperceptibly, as if he had just been handed an opportunity not to sell a car, but to make a point. And in that moment, without realizing it, he had already stepped into a story that would not end the way he expected. The room waited, and somewhere beneath the polished surface of that perfect showroom something had just begun to crack. Richard let the silence stretch just long enough to draw attention before he spoke again. Tilting his head slightly, as if reconsidering something already decided, that particular vehicle, he said slowly, is not typically shown. Without a scheduled appointment, his voice carried just enough volume to reach the nearby customers who had already begun to listen more closely. It is a limited edition model starting at $480,000, he added, emphasizing each word as though translating for someone unfamiliar with the concept of money. A faint ripple of restrained amusement passed through a pair of well-dressed clients standing near the Bentley display. Emily did not react immediately. She took a few calm steps closer to the Rolls Royce, her gaze steady, unhurried, as if she had all the right in the world to stand there. The deep blue paint reflected the overhead lights in smooth waves, and for a moment her reflection appeared across the curved surface, simple, quiet, completely out of place in the eyes of everyone watching. It is beautiful, she said softly, her voice carrying a quiet certainty rather than admiration. I would like to see the interior. Richard's smile thinned almost imperceptibly behind him. One of the younger sales associates shifted awkwardly, sensing the tension building, but saying nothing. I understand the appeal, Richard replied, stepping slightly to block her path with a movement so subtle it could almost be mistaken for courtesy. But these vehicles are reserved for clients who have demonstrated purchasing intent. The words were polished, but the meaning was not difficult to understand. Emily met his eyes again, still calm, still steady. I am prepared to purchase today, she said simply. The room did not laugh outright, but the energy shifted again, sharper, now more expectant. Someone near the back let out a quiet breath that sounded suspiciously like a suppressed chuckle. Richard let out a soft, controlled exhale, as if he had just confirmed a suspicion he already held. I appreciate your enthusiasm, ma'am, he said, his tone tightening beneath its professional surface. But this is not a casual retail environment. Our clients value discretion and exclusivity. He gestured vaguely around the showroom at the polished floors and gleaming vehicles, as if they themselves supported his point. Perhaps you would feel more comfortable exploring options that align more closely with your current situation. The words landed heavier than before, not loud, not aggressive, but unmistakably dismissive. Emily's fingers brushed lightly along the edge of the display platform, not touching the car itself, but close enough to feel its presence. Her expression did not change yet. Something in her stillness deepened just slightly. I am not here to feel comfortable, she replied quietly. I am here to make a purchase. For a brief moment something flickered across Richard's face, irritation perhaps, or the faintest hint of impatience. His eyes scanned her again from head to toe, this time less subtle, more deliberate, as if searching for any sign that would justify taking her seriously. He found none, or at least none he was willing to see. I think there has been a misunderstanding, he said, his voice now carrying a firmer edge. These vehicles are not available for public viewing without prior approval, and certainly not for walk-in inquiries like this. Around them the showroom had grown noticeably quieter. Conversations had slowed, heads had turned just enough to observe without appearing obvious. The tension was no longer subtle, it was settling into the room like a weight, and at the center of it Emily Carter stood, completely still, her eyes steady, her posture unchanged, while Richard Blake unknowingly pushed the moment closer to a line he would not be able to step back from. Richard's patience thinned into something sharper as the seconds stretched, and Emily did not step back. He was no longer simply managing a situation, he was performing, and the audience around them had grown just large enough to matter. His voice lowered slightly, but carried with more weight than before. Ma'am, I am going to need to ask you to step away from the display now, he said, each word measured as though he were giving a final warning. This area is restricted to qualified clients only. The phrase lingered, qualified clients only, echoing in the polished air like a quiet verdict. A man in a tailored gray suit near the entrance folded his arms, watching with mild interest, while a couple beside the Bentley exchanged glances that spoke more loudly than words. Emily did not move. She stood exactly where she was, her gaze still resting on the car, as if the conversation happening around her did not quite reach her. I have already told you, she said calmly. I am ready to purchase today. Richard let out a short breath that almost resembled a laugh, but carried no warmth whatsoever. Prepared to purchase, he repeated softly, then straightened his posture, his expression settling into something colder, more decisive. That is not something we determine based on what a person says, he replied. It is determined by who they are and how they present themselves. The words were careful, but the meaning was unmistakable. A few feet away, one of the younger employees looked down quickly, pretending to adjust paperwork, unwilling to meet anyone's eyes. The room felt tighter, now the quiet no longer neutral, but charged. Emily slowly turned her head and met Richard's gaze fully for the first time. There was no anger in her expression, no embarrassment, just a stillness that seemed to absorb everything around her without reacting. And how exactly do you determine that, she asked, her voice steady enough to cut through the tension. Richard held her gaze for a moment longer than necessary, then glanced briefly toward the watching customers, as if to reinforce the point. We maintain standards here, he said finally, his tone now firm enough to carry across the showroom. Standards that ensure our clients receive the level of service they expect. He paused just long enough for the implication to settle before continuing. I am going to ask you one last time to leave, or I will have security assist you. The word security landed harder than anything else he had said, not loud, not aggressive, but final. Around them the silence deepened. Someone shifted their weight. The faint hum of the air conditioning seemed Suddenly louder, Emily looked at him for another second then. Slowly nodded once, not in agreement, but in acknowledgement of something understood. Fine, she said quietly. I understand now. She turned without another word, her steps as calm and measured as when she had entered. Her reflection moved across the marble floor, each step carrying her toward the exit, while the eyes of the room followed her not with sympathy, but with that same quiet judgment that had greeted her arrival. The glass doors opened again with the same soft whisper, and then she was gone. Just like that, the tension did not disappear immediately. It lingered, hanging in the air, as if the room itself was unsure whether something had just been resolved or whether something far more significant had just begun. Richard adjusted his cufflinks again, exhaling slowly, as if resetting the space around him. It was handled, he said quietly, to no one in particular, but the confidence in his voice did not quite match the stillness that followed, because somewhere beneath the polished surface of that showroom something had shifted in a way no one there yet understood, and outside, beyond the glass doors, Emily Carter walked away, without looking back, her expression unchanged, her silence carrying far more weight than anything that had just been said. The morning light arrived differently the next day, sharper, brighter, as it spilled across the wide glass windows of Blackstone luxury motors, casting long reflections across the marble floors that had witnessed the quiet dismissal only hours before. Inside the showroom, everything appeared exactly as it had the day before. Polished cars aligned perfectly, employees moving with rehearsed precision, conversations flowing in low, confident tones. Yet beneath the surface, something unspoken lingered, like a faint echo of a moment no one had fully processed. Richard Blake stood near his desk, reviewing a tablet, his posture as composed as ever, his expression unreadable to anyone who did not know him well. The incident from the previous day had already been categorized in his mind, filed away as a minor inconvenience, an example of maintaining standards in an environment that demanded exclusivity. He had seen it countless times before, people walking in out of curiosity, mistaking access for entitlement, and leaving when reality corrected them. It was routine, predictable, forgettable. At least, that is what he believed. A young associate approached him briefly, mentioning that a private client appointment had been rescheduled for later in the afternoon. Richard nodded dismissively, his attention already shifting back to the numbers on his screen. The showroom doors remained closed for a moment longer than usual, as if holding their breath, and then, without warning, a low mechanical hum rolled across the street outside, not loud, not aggressive, but unmistakable. The kind of sound that did not ask for attention, yet commanded it effortlessly. Conversations inside the showroom faltered mid-sentence. A few heads turned instinctively toward the glass windows, where the reflection of something large and impossibly sleek began to glide across the polished surface of the floor. The vehicle appeared slowly, at first its silhouette cutting through the morning light, before revealing itself fully, a Rolls Royce Phantom, deep black, with a finish so flawless it mirrored the world around it like liquid glass. The car moved with deliberate precision before coming to a smooth, controlled stop directly in front of the showroom entrance. For a brief second no one spoke. The engine idled quietly, almost respectfully, as if aware of its own presence. Then the rear door opened with a soft, measured motion, and a man stepped out. His shoes touched the pavement with quiet authority, his posture straight, his movements unhurried, yet commanding attention. Without effort, Daniel Carter adjusted his charcoal suit jacket as he rose fully into view, the subtle glint of a platinum watch catching the sunlight. For just a moment his expression was calm, composed, but there was something in the way he observed the building, something deliberate, something precise. Inside the showroom the shift was immediate. A sales associate near the entrance straightened instinctively. Another employee whispered something under their breath, unsure, but suddenly alert. Even Richard's eyes lifted from his tablet, drawn toward the glass as recognition flickered, not fully formed yet, but enough to interrupt his focus. Daniel did not rush. He took a single step forward, then another, his gaze steady as it moved across the facade of the showroom, before settling briefly on the reflection of his own car in the glass. The kind of car that did not arrive without purpose, the kind of presence that did not appear without consequence. The doors had not yet opened, but already the atmosphere inside had changed. The confidence that had filled the room the day before now felt thinner, quieter, as if something larger had entered the space before the man himself even crossed the threshold. And in that suspended moment between recognition and realization, the entire showroom seemed to pause on the edge of something. None of them were prepared to face the glass doors opened before Daniel Carter even reached them, as if the building itself understood. Who stood outside? A senior associate hurried forward, his posture suddenly straighter, his voice noticeably more respectful. Good morning, sir. Welcome to Blackstone Luxury Motors. How may we assist you today? Daniel stepped inside, without breaking stride, his eyes moving across the showroom with quiet precision, taking in the arrangement, the staff, the subtle tension that had replaced yesterday's confidence. His presence did not need to announce itself. It settled into the room like a shift in gravity. Conversations stopped entirely, now replaced by a silence that carried expectation rather than curiosity. Richard Blake stepped forward from the back of the showroom, his expression already recalibrating into practiced professionalism, the kind reserved for high-value clients. His smile returned, but this time it reached a little further, his posture more attentive, his tone carefully measured. Good morning, sir. I am Richard Blake, general manager. Here, it is a pleasure to have you with us. He extended a hand. Daniel glanced at it briefly before meeting Richard's eyes, his expression calm, unreadable. I am looking for information about a vehicle, Daniel said, his voice even controlled. The Rolls Royce Phantom you have on display. Richard's smile widened just slightly. Of course, sir, excellent choice. That model is one of our most exclusive offerings. He gestured toward the elevated platform, his tone now entirely different from the day before. I would be happy to arrange a private viewing for you immediately. Please follow me. As they walked across the showroom floor, employees subtly stepped aside, creating a clear path. A few exchanged glances, recognition beginning to surface in quiet whispers. The name Carter moved through the room softly, almost cautiously, as if confirming what they already suspected. Daniel stopped a few feet from the display, his gaze resting on the car for a moment before shifting back to Richard. The first, understand, there are certain requirements to view this vehicle, he said calmly. Richard nodded quickly. Yes, sir, we maintain a level of exclusivity to ensure our clients receive the highest standard of service. Daniel's expression did not change. I see, he replied. Then perhaps you can clarify something for me. His tone remained polite, but something beneath it sharpened almost imperceptibly. Yesterday my wife came here to inquire about this same vehicle. The words landed quietly, but the effect was immediate. Richard's posture stiffened just slightly, the practiced ease in his expression faltering for a fraction of a second before he recovered. I am not aware of that specific interaction, sir, he said carefully, though a flicker of uncertainty crossed his eyes. Daniel held his gaze. She was told she did not meet your standards, he continued. She was asked to leave the room, went completely still. No one moved, no one spoke. Even the faint hum of the air conditioning seemed to disappear. Richard's mind moved quickly, now searching, replaying fragments of the previous day, until recognition struck with sudden clarity. The simple woman, the quiet refusal, the calm exit. His throat tightened almost imperceptibly as the pieces aligned. Daniel did not raise his voice, did not step closer, did not need to. His presence alone carried the weight of what was coming next. I would like to understand your standards, he said finally, his voice steady, but unmistakably firm, because from where I stand they appear to be based on something other than respect. And in that moment the balance of power in the room shifted completely, leaving Richard Blake standing in a silence that no longer belonged to him. Richard Blake opened his mouth to respond, but no words came immediately. The confidence that had defined his tone only moments ago now replaced by something far less certain. His eyes flickered briefly toward the surrounding staff, as if searching for an anchor, but found none. The room offered no support, no distraction, only silence pressing in from every direction. Sir, I assure you there must have been a misunderstanding, he said finally, his voice controlled, but lacking its earlier sharpness. We have strict policies in place to ensure the experience of our clientele is maintained at the highest level. Daniel did not interrupt, he did not raise his voice, he simply watched, and that was enough to unravel the carefully constructed authority Richard had relied on for years. A misunderstanding, Daniel repeated softly, as if weighing the word. My wife was told she did not belong here, that she did not meet your standards, and that security would be involved if she did not leave. He paused just long enough for the words to settle into the room, like something permanent. That does not sound like a misunderstanding. Richard felt the shift more clearly now. It was no longer about a single interaction or a single customer. It was about something larger, something he could no longer control. Sir, I was not aware of her identity, he said quickly, the sentence escaping before he could reshape it, and there it was, the Room seemed to tighten again, not with anticipation this time, but with realization. Daniel's expression did not change, but something in his gaze sharpened just slightly. You were not aware of her identity, he repeated, so your treatment would have been different if you had been. Richard hesitated just a fraction of a second too long. The answer was obvious to everyone standing there, and in that silence it became undeniable. Daniel took a slow, measured breath, his posture still relaxed, his tone still calm. Then let me clarify something for you, he said. My wife does not carry her worth in labels or appearances. She does not need to announce who she is to deserve basic respect. The words were not loud, but they carried across the showroom with unmistakable clarity. A few employees lowered their eyes, unable to meet the weight of what was being said. Others stood frozen, caught between discomfort and the quiet recognition that they had witnessed the same thing the day before. Richard swallowed hard, his composure slipping further as he attempted to recover. We value all of our customers, sir, he said, but the sentence felt hollow. Even as he spoke it, Daniel stepped slightly to the side, his gaze briefly resting on the Rolls Royce before returning to Richard. Value is not something you declare, he replied. It is something you demonstrate, and yesterday you made your position very clear. The silence that followed was deeper than before, heavier, more final. It was no longer the silence of curiosity or tension, it was the silence of consequence. And in that moment Richard Blake understood something he had not considered the day before, that the quiet woman he had dismissed without hesitation had never needed to prove anything at all. It was him who had just revealed everything. Richard Blake stood motionless for a moment longer as the weight of Daniel's words settled into the room, pressing against the polished surfaces and perfectly arranged displays that suddenly felt less certain than they had the day before. His mind moved quickly, searching for a response that could restore control, but every option seemed to collapse before it fully formed around him. The employees who once mirrored his authority now avoided his gaze, their silence no longer neutral, but quietly distancing. The power he had relied on was no longer anchored where he thought it was. Sir, I understand your concern, Richard began carefully, his voice softer, now more measured than ever before. If there was any offense caused, I take full responsibility, and I would like to personally apologize to your wife. Daniel did not react immediately. He let the words linger, as if testing their sincerity, before responding. An apology is a start, he said calmly, but it does not change what was revealed yesterday. He took a slow step forward, not aggressive, not confrontational, but enough to close the distance between them just slightly. The showroom seemed to tighten again, as if even the air had drawn closer to listen. My wife walked in here with the intention to make a purchase, Daniel continued. She was respectful, she was clear, and she was dismissed not because of her actions, but because of your assumptions. Richard's jaw tightened subtly as he listened. The truth of the statement leaving little room for defense. I would like the opportunity to make this right, Richard said quickly, the words now carrying a hint of urgency. We can arrange any accommodation necessary, a private consultation, priority access to the vehicle, any terms you require. Daniel shook his head, once a small controlled movement. That is not what this is about, he replied. It was never about access or priority. His gaze moved briefly across the showroom, taking in the employees, the customers, the silent witnesses to what had unfolded. This place runs on perception, he continued quietly, on who appears to belong and who does not. And yesterday, you made a decision based on that perception alone. A faint murmur shifted at the edge of the room, quickly silenced as Daniel's attention returned to Richard. The difference today, Daniel said, is that now you recognize me. Richard opened his mouth again, but stopped himself. The implication too clear to ignore. If I had not walked in here this morning, Daniel added, his voice still even. Would anything have changed? The question hung unanswered because it did not need a response. The answer was written across every face in the room. Richard lowered his eyes for a brief moment, the first visible break in his composure. No, sir, he admitted quietly, and with that single admission something final settled into place. Not loud, not dramatic, but absolute. Daniel gave a small nod as if acknowledging a conclusion that had already been reached. Honesty matters, he said, and so do the consequences that follow it. He reached into his jacket pocket and removed a simple card, placing it gently on the desk beside them. The motion was unhurried, almost effortless, but it carried a weight that no raised voice ever could. I will be in touch regarding how we proceed from here, Daniel said, his tone calm, but unmistakably decisive. What happens next will depend on whether your standards are capable of changing, or if they were always meant to exclude people like my wife. The room fell completely, still once more, not with tension this time, but with the quiet understanding that something irreversible had just been set into motion, and Richard Blake stood at the center of it, no longer in control, but finally aware of what that truly meant. Daniel Carter did not wait for a response after placing the card on the desk. He simply turned with the same calm precision that had defined every movement since his arrival and began walking toward the exit. His footsteps were quiet against the marble floor, yet each one seemed to echo louder than anything that had been said. The showroom parted for him, without instruction, employees stepping aside, instinctively, no longer guided by hierarchy, but by something far more immediate. Recognition of presence, of consequence, of authority that did not need to announce itself. Behind him, Richard Blake remained still, his eyes fixed on the small card resting on the polished surface in front of him, as if it carried more weight than it physically could. No one spoke, no one dared to break the silence that followed Daniel's departure. The glass doors opened again with their soft mechanical whisper and closed just as gently behind him, sealing the moment inside like something preserved. The Rolls Royce outside waited exactly where it had been, its engine still idling with quiet restraint. As Daniel approached, the driver moved, without hesitation, opening the rear door. With practiced efficiency, Daniel paused briefly before entering, his gaze lifting once more toward the showroom windows, where reflections blurred the view of those inside. For a fraction of a second, it was impossible to tell whether he was looking at them or simply looking through them. Then he stepped into the vehicle, and the door closed with a muted finality. Inside the showroom, the atmosphere shifted again, but this time there was no tension left to build, only the slow unfolding of realization. A senior associate moved cautiously toward Richard, his voice lowered, uncertain. "Sir, should we prepare a response or contact corporate?" Richard did not answer. Immediately his eyes remained on the card, his mind racing through implications. He could no longer dismiss the name. Carter was not unfamiliar, not in his industry, not at this level. It carried weight in circles that did not tolerate missteps of this nature. He picked up the card finally, his fingers steady, but his expression no longer composed. The room watched, not openly, but through glances, through the quiet awareness that something significant had just happened beyond their control. Richard exhaled slowly, as if attempting to steady something internal that had already begun to shift. "Contact corporate," he said at last, his voice quieter than it had ever been since stepping onto that showroom floor yesterday, and arrange a full internal review effective immediately. The words were not loud, but they carried across the room with unmistakable clarity. This was no longer about a single customer interaction. It had moved beyond that into something larger, something that would reach further than anyone present had anticipated. A junior employee near the entrance lowered his gaze, recalling the moment from the day before, the quiet woman, the calm exit, the silence that followed, and for the first time understanding that it had never been an ordinary interaction at all. Outside, the Rolls Royce pulled away, smoothly merging into the morning traffic, without urgency, without spectacle, leaving behind nothing but its reflection fading from the glass. Inside Blackstone Luxury Motors, the showroom remained exactly as it had been, polished, organized, immaculate, yet the confidence that once filled it had been replaced by something else, something quieter, something far more fragile, because for the first time the standards that had once defined the space were no longer unquestioned, and in that stillness the truth lingered longer than any presence ever could. The days that followed did not unfold with noise or spectacle, but with a quiet efficiency that carried far more weight than any immediate reaction ever could. Corporate representatives arrived within 48 hours, their presence subtle but unmistakable, as they moved through Blackstone Luxury Motors with measured precision, reviewing reports, interviewing staff, and observing interactions that had once gone unquestioned. Conversations that had previously been casual now carried a careful tone, employees choosing their words more deliberately, aware that something fundamental had shifted beneath them. Richard Blake stood in his office, overlooking the showroom, his reflection faint against the glass as he watched the same polished floor that had once felt like his domain. Now it felt different, not unfamiliar, but no longer unquestioned. The card Daniel Carter had left sat on his desk, its presence a constant reminder of a moment that could not be undone. He had replayed the interaction more times than he could count, each detail clearer with every repetition, the tone in his voice, the assumptions in his words, the quiet certainty he had carried without ever being Challenged until now across town, Emily Carter moved through her morning. With the same quiet rhythm that had defined her before any of it happened, there was no change in her routine, no outward sign of the impact she had made. She walked through a small local market, selecting fresh produce, exchanging polite greetings with the cashier, her presence as unassuming as ever, yet grounded in something far more certain than appearances. Later that afternoon, a message arrived, not dramatic, not urgent, but precise, a formal invitation for a private consultation, not at the showroom, but at a neutral location, accompanied by a written acknowledgement of what had occurred and a commitment to reevaluate company policies. Emily read it once, her expression calm, as she set the phone aside. Without immediate response that evening, Daniel returned home, placing his keys on the counter. As he glanced toward her, there was no need to explain what had been set in motion. She met his gaze with a quiet understanding, not of revenge, but of resolution. They sat together in the soft light of their home. The world outside continuing as it always had, yet something intangible had shifted, not just for them, but for those who had witnessed the moment unfold. Back at the showroom, the changes were already visible, not in grand gestures, but in small, deliberate actions. A junior employee greeted a customer at the door with a tone that carried genuine respect rather than evaluation. A manager paused before speaking, choosing words with greater care. The standards had not disappeared, but they had begun to change, shaped now by something that could not be ignored. Richard finally picked up the card, once more turning it between his fingers before placing it back down with a steadiness that felt different from before, not confident, not certain, but aware. And in that awareness, there was something new, something quieter, something that did not rely on position or perception to exist, because what had entered that showroom was never about wealth or status. It was about something far more enduring, the understanding that dignity is not something granted by others, it is something revealed by how they choose to treat those who have nothing to prove. And on that day, in a place built on appearances, the truth had settled into the silence, where it would remain long after everything else had moved on.